Okay, it's 10:30. We have a good number of people joining us. So let's get started, everyone. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Taking Care of Yourself, Self-Compassion for Caregivers. Thank you so much for joining in with us this morning. My name is Stacey Dawes, and I'm the Health and Community Engagement Lead with Family Caregivers of BC, and I'll be your host for today's session. Today's session, Taking Care of Yourself, Self-Compassion for Caregivers, will be presented by Cole Little, one of FCBC Family Caregivers of BC's Caregiver Volunteer Ambassadors. Cole is a caregiver living in Victoria, balancing caregiving with her professional work as a mental health therapist and writer. So before we begin, please take a moment to familiarize yourself with the webinar controls. For most of you, these controls are going to appear at the bottom of your screen. And if you do not see them, try just clicking or tapping on your screen and they should appear for you. This webinar will have limited interactivity. Participant cameras and your microphones are turned off, and be using the chat and the Q&A at the bottom of the screen, those features throughout today's session. Although we won't be able to see or hear you directly, we absolutely want to hear from you. I encourage you to keep your chat and your Q&A box open to share questions or comments or reflections as we move through the presentation today. We will be monitoring the questions throughout the webinar, and we're going to leave some time at the end of the presentation to respond to as many questions as possible. So to get us started, I'd like to respectfully acknowledge that Family Caregivers of BC operates on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of Indigenous and First Nations people across all regions of BC. I am joining you today from the traditional territories of the Coast Salish peoples, including the territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh First Nations. May is National Caregiver Awareness Month. It's a time to recognize and raise awareness about the experiences of more than 8 million caregivers across Canada who provide care and essential support to a family member or friend. It's also an opportunity to acknowledge the essential role caregivers play in the well-being of our communities, while also recognizing the challenges and the stress and the emotional impact that caregiving can bring. At Family Caregivers of BC, we support caregivers through our education, through resources, emotional support. We have caregiver coaching and connection to community services across the province. So today's session is an opportunity for you all to pause and to reflect on the importance of self-compassion and caring for ourselves while also caring for others. So we're grateful to have you here with us. And with that, I'm pleased to turn things on over to Cole, who will be presenting today.
Thank you so much, Stacey. And even though I can't see the folks who are here, I want to say a big warm welcome. And just taking the time to come to this webinar today is a step in the self-care direction. So I just want to applaud you for that. As Stacey said, my name is Cole, and I am a volunteer caregiver ambassador with Family Caregivers of BC. And I will never say the acronym because my tongue always trips over it. So, and I am zooming in from the traditional territories of the Wasanich people. And I'm so deeply honored and grateful to have been on this land for a long time, on these unceded territories, and the enduring stewardship and generosity of these folks. And as Stacey mentioned, our main office is in the Lekwungen territory, also known as the Songhees Esquimalt First Nations, who have also been leaders in stewardship of our local land. I'm also, until recently, a full-time living caregiver to my mother-in-law, and more recently, a caregiver to my mother. And Stacey and I were talking before the webinar that sometimes it feels like the role of caregiver is an iteration of versions. And the more versions I participate in, the better I've become at understanding the importance of self-care. And that's what we're here to talk about today. So Stacey did a fabulous introduction into what the Family Caregivers of BC does. And I just want to emphasize that it's 100% dedicated to the well-being of family caregivers. And the mission is quite simple but powerful, and it's to support the people who support others. And this work has been going on since 1989. So that's an enduring legacy in the community and in British Columbia. Really walking alongside caregivers, listening to their needs, and creating pathways to resources, connection, and hope. And Family Caregivers of BC is really grounded in three pillars, and these are caregiver support, education and engagement, and collaboration. And if you think about it, all three pillars are really about making caregiving more visible, more valued, and better supported. And I can say firsthand, as a caregiver, the impact that Family Caregivers of BC has had on my sustainability as a caregiver. So let's talk a little bit about these three pillars. So we have the caregiver support, and I'll be talking about this in more detail. We have education, and we have collaboration. So really, when supporting unpaid family and friend caregivers across the province, we're looking at emotional support, navigation, referrals, support groups, webinars, training programs, advocacy. I kind of sometimes feel like there's no limit to what Family Caregivers of British Columbia is willing to do for caregivers here. And really, the important message is you are not alone. And sometimes you might feel alone. There are resources, communities, and people who are willing to walk alongside you, who have lived experience and access to resources that can be helpful. So let's talk a little bit and dive into focusing on you, the caregiver, and how you can sustain yourself. So again, coming back to the first pillar of support, which is caregiver support, as Stacey had mentioned in her introduction, we provide caregiver peer support and workshops. And what I love about this is that depending on where you're located and depending on your schedule, you have an opportunity to attend peer support groups in person or in virtual. We've offered intensive journaling workshops and art therapy workshops. One of the best things about the caregiver peer support group is, in my experience, been able to go and talk to like-minded people. And even if our caregiving journeys are unique, that we're bonded by a common identity of being a caregiver and feeling supported by others walking the same path. Family Caregivers of BC also gives caregiving coaching, and this is for more complex situations, navigation needs, and it's up to 4 one-hour sessions, which can feel quite valuable as you're trying to navigate certain pieces of the system or other family dynamics. We also have the caregiver support line. I can't speak highly enough of this service. It's available Monday to Friday, and it's offering free emotional support and guidance to caregiver services. I had a situation where I was navigating a hospital discharge, and the caregiver support line was able to walk me through step by step exactly how to make the best discharge plan possible for my mother-in-law. There's also the online learning center. If you haven't already visited, it's a fabulous repository. It's just great. It's got caregiving articles, tools, flipbooks, webinars, and podcast episodes. And I think importantly to mention that all these services are free of charge to caregivers. And the other piece I love about all that's offered here is that it really there's a variety of ways to meet people's learning needs as well. So maybe you don't have time to sit and read a whole article, but maybe you have time to listen to a podcast while you're doing an errand, for example. Maybe in person isn't your thing, but you can hop onto a Zoom call and get support that way. So these are all the fabulous things that are available. And one thing I always tell others is, you can access services sooner than later, and it's a richness that will serve your journey well. So let's talk about caregiver pace. So caregiving is not usually something any of us maybe anticipate or sign up or even train for, and yet here we are. It sort of becomes the new normal in our life, right? I know for myself, I kind of feel like caregiving was a bit of a slow creep when my mother-in-law was living more independently. Suddenly, there was more errands, there was more crises that were being attended to. And then suddenly, she's living with me, and my reality looks very different, right? Um, a lot of us don't choose caregiving, but oftentimes we will step up to do it. And I think it's important to acknowledge that it can be emotionally and physically demanding, even downright exhausting. And it can also be one of the most rewarding gifts you can give to another person. And I can say that on the other side of caregiving for my mother-in-law, I'm so grateful that I did that. And as I carry on the journey of caregiving with my own mother, to be able to apply the things I've learned. So when we're talking about like self-care and compassion today, it's never to diminish the hard parts. It's really to help find ways to keep going without losing yourself in the process. So we see many challenges amongst caregivers, and I kind of knew the numbers were high, but Stacey, like 8 million across Canada, I'm a little bit, I don't know, like amazed at that 8 million people are doing this work, this unpaid work. And before we dive into some of the challenges we're seeing, I think it's important to also recognize that caregivers experience their own chronic health conditions at twice the rate of the general population, right? This work is hard. And so even with deep commitment, many caregivers feel the efforts that they're applying are maybe taken for granted. And this could be by other family members, broader system. It could be sometimes even the person receiving care, right? This can leave folks leaving have a sense of being alone, unseen, in the many responsibilities that they carry, and often having to advocate for not only their loved one, but also for their own need for support and recognition. Right. And as we connect with caregivers across the province, a number of common and often deeply personal challenges emerge. So on the left of the screen there, you can see that there's overwhelming responsibilities, right? Many of us are balancing our own well-being, the needs of loved ones, and caregivers are notorious for putting themselves last. I was joking with Stacey earlier that I was taken out by a bee on the weekend and ordered to do some bed rest. And interestingly enough, that can be a little bit difficult for me with the Rolodex of responsibilities that caregiving entails. System navigation, right? We're looking at healthcare and support systems that become hard to understand, sometimes even harder to access, right? Often fragmented, I've experienced. So I have to at times felt like a sort of system navigator, and that's where Family Caregivers of BC was very helpful in many circumstances for me because they can help you. They can be your co-pilot in that navigation. Lots of folks experience financial strain. This might impact your housing, your nutrition, or access to essential services. I know for myself, I had to move down to part-time work to accommodate the caregiving tasks. And while rationally I knew the impact that that would have, it was also a shift in sort of, I don't know, quality of life or, and also a shift in identity. The emotional toll, we see burnout, stress, and emotional exhaustion are common, and oftentimes caregivers are carrying this burden silently, right? They may not be letting other people know how tired they are or how overwhelmed they are with responsibility. We often want to be seen as capable, and that sometimes means not letting the person we're caring for also know the level of exhaustion we're experiencing. And that, of course, can leak out in different ways. Isolation, we have vital roles as caregivers, really, we truly do. And yet, paradoxically, we kind of feel invisible at times, right? Disconnected from peers, maybe without a strong network to lean on. And again, this is where Family Caregivers of BC sort of, this might be a bit of a strong metaphor, but it felt like it became a bit of my extended family, of which I don't have a lot here. We see a change in family dynamics, right? Caregiving can strain relationships. especially when differences in care should be provided or communicated. And I'm having a little bit of a chuckle here because one of the things I've had to learn in terms of my own self-care journey is being able to ask for help or delegate tasks. But also to recognize that maybe those tasks aren't executed to my standards, right? So really each of these challenges like reflect the complexity and the weight of caregiving today. And together they remind us of why responsive, compassionate support systems are so essential, which is why I'm so happy you're here today, because we're going to talk a little bit more about self-care. But first, let's talk about what might be the signs of stress. So these might be some signs that, stress is impacting you, right? So I don't know that they're particularly ranked in any order, and some might apply to you and some might not. Um, but as I go through this list, like just maybe notice one or two of these that might feel familiar. Okay. So the first is denial about disease and effect. This could be if you're caregiving somebody who has a progressive disease and kind of wanting to sort of minimize the impact that the disease is having on the person you love, but also maybe the family. I know for myself, sometimes I would get caught up in magical thinking that if we just did X, Y, Z, that, I had the power to improve quality of life, even though my person was going downhill. There could be anger. Again, I mentioned that sometimes when there's strain in the family unit or the caregiving unit, that people can sometimes feel a little bit irritable. Your fuse might feel a little bit shorter. You might be angry at the change of circumstances. Maybe there's some resentment for the role you're taking on if other family members aren't stepping up. The list is long. Social withdrawal. This doesn't mean that suddenly one day you wake up and you decide, oh, I can't go out anymore. But an example might be that you can't take up invitations from friends or maybe join any extracurriculars. I know that suddenly when I was in my 50s, I had a curfew of 7 because, there was bedtime medication and there was bedtime routines and if I didn't have an elder care available to me, then I did have to turn down many invitations. Anxiety about the future. Again, like if you think about, you know, what's going to happen, anxiety about money, anxiety about like where this person might be living if we can't care for them. There's so many anxieties, really. And, there's a great term called catastrophizing, which is like forecasting in the future and imagining the worst. It's our brain's way of trying to protect us really from future harm. But it can result in feeling quite worn down and kind of having a toll on our nervous system. Depression, we see exhaustion, sleeplessness. This could be due to the anxiety. It also can be due to the caregiving needs that are sometimes required in terms of being up in the night. Emotional reactions, crying or yelling. Um, this is emotional work. I think that needs to be acknowledged. Lack of concentration. Stress does this to our brains, by the way. I always often feel like, exactly in the times when my brain needs to be on fire and like working the best, is usually in very stressful situations. And sometimes we just lose our concentration. And this can result in a bit of a snowball effect of feeling like, maybe a little bit like ineffectual, which raises your anxiety. And we can see sort of where this cycle goes, right? And our own health problems, and these can be related to, as we said earlier, like, caregivers with the burden of stress that they carry are more prone to chronic conditions. And yet many of us, of course, are also aging alongside the people we're caring for. And so that brings its own challenges around health issues. So again, it's like kind of navigating these parallel worlds in a way that is sustainable. So think about just a moment, like, is any of these sort of present for you? And if it is, by the way, it's not a sign of weakness. It just means that it's a signal from your body and your mind that you might need some support, right? And recognizing stress is really the first step to being able to take care of yourself and that stress. Okay. So let's look at where your current self-care practices are. Okay. So as I go through this list, I just want you to imagine, like, I don't know, if there's a phrase or a word or image that comes up for you as I ask these questions, and you can jot them down or just maybe silently reflect on them. But as you've been on your caregiver journey, and whether that means you are new to this or you've been doing it a long time, just ask yourself, like, how is my current self-care? And honestly, like, do an honest appraisal of that. And then how resilient do I feel? Sometimes I'll ask people, like, if 0 is I have no resiliency and 10 is I'm on top of the world, where would you put yourself? What do I need for support? Again, just think if there's a word or image or phrase or name of a person, maybe. Then ask, where do I turn? Who are my support systems? Who kind of supports me to support my person? Okay. And just notice for a moment if you're feeling any judgment about what you've reflected on. Really, these are questions to help you pause and reflect. Just kind of notice where you're at. And they're not about judgment, it's about awareness. So then what is self-care really? So the definition is the practice of taking an active role in protecting one's own well-being and happiness, in particular during periods of stress. So really intentional actions that you're taking, right, to protect your physical, your emotional, mental, social, spiritual well-being. And it's really about preserving your energy as best you can so you can continue to care for yourself and for others, right? And sometimes I think people imagine that taking time for ourselves makes us a bad caregiver. Don't want to be selfish, right? But in reality, it really is what is going to allow you to keep going, right? And we're going to talk a little bit about like small things that people can be doing, in self-care. It doesn't have to be this grandiose project, right? Self-care can be like taking 5 deep breaths, even during the course of this webinar, calling a friend, stepping outside for 10 minutes, and I'll share more examples as we continue with the webinar. But I think the most important thing to say is that self-care is not selfish. It's essential. So it might be helpful to think about yourself as a little bit of a battery, okay? So we know batteries don't work when they're on empty. If anybody has ever tried to use their phone and that little red bar is there, you know exactly what I'm talking about. And ourselves, we're kind of akin to this battery, aren't we? So think about for a moment that every thought, interaction, and activity either drains or sustains you. And so this slide's about the drains, okay? So if you just brainstorm for yourself for a moment, like what depletes your energy? What activities, which people, which ways of thinking, or maybe self-talk? And again, we're not looking at this as an exercise in judgment, because I know for myself sometimes what depleted my energy was the very person I was caring for. So it's not about judgment. Again, it's about awareness. So what activities, which people, and which ways of thinking deplete your energy? And then, of course, on the flip side of that is what nurtures you, what energizes you, um, what activities bring you up, who lifts you up, what places or practices restore you. And so when we think about self-care, it's about making sure that the drains are balanced with the recharges. You don't have to, and by the way, you can erase every stressor, but you do need to refill, right? So coming back to self-care then. So what does self-care look like? Well, Family Caregivers of BC, we know that taking care of yourself, it's unique and personal, right? We are not going to set out a prescription pad and say this is what is required self-care for a caregiver. But it does share some key components, which is self-awareness, self-compassion, creating connections and support, and supporting our own health, right? So I would really invite you, if you came into this webinar with any ideas about what self-care should look like, is to kind of park that for a little while and think about what self-care can look like for you. Sometimes it might be something small, like we talked about, like, making time for your cup of tea. Sometimes it's simply a rest, or sometimes it's saying no. It can be all these things and more. Only you know what activity will truly feel comforting to you. Okay. So we talk about self-awareness as being sort of the cornerstone to getting the self-care and self-compassion piece going, right? So what is self-awareness? It's the ability to know your internal state, preference, resources, values, and intuition. Because understanding how you feel is actually the first step to coping with stress, right? Some days it might feel like boot camp, and other days you expect things to be hard and you breeze right through them, right? And why is having self-awareness important? Well, it allows you to monitor your inner thoughts and emotions as they arise. This in turn supports you in taking action. And you first need to be self-aware, and then you can implement self-care strategies, right? And as we mentioned, caregiving is really unique to all families, right? It's very likely that you've experienced changes in relationships with your spouse or partner, children, siblings, and the person you're caring for. So you can expect strong feelings to surface. It's okay. This is what self-awareness is for. It's for tuning in, right? And this might mean that tuning in allows you to recognize when you're sort of running on empty before you end up crashing. So part of this journey is also having self-compassion, right? Um, I would imagine that, many people here maybe have self-talk that they would never use on their best friend, right? So why is self-compassion important? It leads to an increased feelings of happiness, optimism, gratitude, life satisfaction. It's linked to better coping and resilience in the face of demanding life situations, such as caring for someone else, right? For caregivers, self-compassion is shown to lead more satisfaction, caring for someone, and decreases the chances of burnout. And challenges can be addressed by reflecting for yourself and empathetically acknowledging this is hard right now. It's only natural that I'm feeling sad or stressed. Okay. We also need connection. So a big challenge for caregivers, like we mentioned earlier, is isolation. And I don't know, but for folks here, but I felt like I was surrounded by the person I was caring for and all their television shows. But I also felt a little bit alone and a little bit lonely. And so this was a big piece for me, right? And what we mean by connecting, I want to be really clear here, is reaching out to other people, seeking support, sharing stories, finding a sense of belonging. Um, and it's important to find people who are you can be honest with, right? Who aren't going to judge you, such as family member, friend, community support organization, professional, really sharing the reality of your journey, right? Because we know that caregivers are so busy and consumed by the things they have to juggle. Few make time for friends, neglecting their social health. And asking for help is something most caregivers struggle with, right? There's value placed on independence, makes us worry about being a burden to others. Caregiving, unfortunately and fortunately, is not something that can be accomplished alone, at least not for very long. I think there's a song on the radio that has a lyric that I thought I could handle both ends of that candle, but I'm throwing in the towel. So really, it's about keeping yourself connected in ways that are going to allow you to sustain yourself. So what might some of these connections look like? Well, attending a caregiver support group. This is where you can share concerns, receive peer support from others in some similar situations. I often joke that, I can read as many manuals as I want on caregiving, but the best tips and tricks of the trade came from folks in the support group. And as we mentioned, they're throughout BC and they can be available in line or in person. And I would really encourage people to check it out. Some of these groups, by the way, are uh, uh, subject specific. Like, so, if you're juggling caregiving with like working, there's a support group that's directed towards them. Some are disease specific, etc. So all that information is there. And really, connection is a way to build resilience. So let's look at that. So what is this thing called resilience? It's not just one thing. Don't you wish? Don't you wish you could just get a prescription for resilience and fill it and be done? It's really how we adapt in a healthy way to stress, how we recover or bounce back from a difficult situation, and how we expand our capacity to grow from an experience or what we can consider bouncing forward, right? It's not one single trait. Like I said, it's a process we can strengthen. So building resilience sort of 5 minutes at a time, let's put it that way. So let's talk about finding your refuge in the storm. So sometimes resilience comes in these micro moments, right? It's, these little islands of refuge. It could be just like, I don't know, laughing with a friend. It could be stepping outside for fresh air. Or what we joke about becoming a bathroom meditation master, closing the door, having a moment to breathe, or splash cold water on your face, right? So out of necessity, I learned that there was these micro moments that had to be built into my day because I couldn't get into my car and drive across town to go to a yoga class because there was nobody home to care for the person that needed caring. So sometimes what I will do is just step outside and name all the colors in my garden. I love to garden, but I can't name all the plants, that's for sure. And sometimes it will just be like, I will take 5 minutes and brush my dog. He loves it. We know from the research that like petting an animal actually is good for slowing down your heart rate and releasing some happy chemicals. Sometimes if it's tea, this is water right now, if you can hear from my scratchy voice, but sometimes taking a moment just to smell my tea. I don't know what kind of tea people here like, but I'm a big fan of Earl Grey. I bought myself some nice face cream several months back, and I would just kind of take a moment and put it on, have a little mini massage on my face. And really, it's about what can you access during the day? That's just these little moments that are about grounding you in the moment. And think of them as like, I don't know, like drops in a bucket, right? Like that bucket is going to fill up. And that's important when you're thirsty and you need to have a drink. So there's 5 dimensions to well-being, right? We can see here we've got physical, psychological, emotional, social, intellectual, and spiritual. And maintaining overall well-being involves taking care of different aspects of our health. So just for a moment, like have a look at this wheel and kind of identify for yourself like where you might be doing well. Like maybe I know for myself, for example, having dogs means that like my physical health is well taken care of most of the time because they need a lot of walking. Um, but maybe in my caregiving journey, then my spiritual practice kind of fell to the wayside because I couldn't attend the community that I belong to. All right. So think for yourself, like, where am I doing well and where can I kind of bolster up? Right. Little bits kind of add up. So what's under physical? Like this is sleep, nutrition, exercise, healthcare, wellness practices. Psychological and emotional. Oh, back to physical. This is kind of silly. So I talk about walking my dogs, but that's kind of duty bound, isn't it? That's something I'm also doing as a caregiving kind of job is because they can't get into the car and drive themselves to the lake. So, how do I also bring some joy to my physicality? So the neighbors might think about this because I leave my living room window open, but I'll sometimes have like put on my favorite song and I'll dance around to my favorite song. And sometimes I would do that before making my mother-in-law lunch, which was always a challenge in terms of her consumption, to sort of like get myself kind of grooving. And we know the research also tells us that bigger body movements, relax the nervous system in different ways. So wherever you can kind of sneak in a little bit of physical activity, the better. We look at psychological and emotional. So this might look like journaling, support groups, counseling, expression through the arts. hobbies, being in nature, gratitude. I brought along today my gratitude jar, which I also collaged. Um, and I just put like little daily things in there. Doesn't have to be big. Again, we're coming back from like big expectations. What does this say? Red tulips in February. I didn't even remember I put that in there. There you go. So, what about social? What about the social dimension? Spending time with friends, social groups, creating a social, creating a support network. I know I had mentioned earlier that sometimes like it's hard to like make maybe commitments in advance or health challenges change with the person you're caregiving, so plans get canceled. So I made it an effort to like hang out with just sit outside with my neighbor. I'd have my phone, my mother-in-law would have her phone in her space, and if she needed anything, I was right there. But I was also outside with a neighbor, gossiping a little bit, and having a cup of tea. So it was sort of a win-win. So think about how you can also like be, what's the word I'm looking for? Being creative about how you're getting all these needs met as well. Intellectual, learning new things, taking a class, keeping the mind active. I know a challenge for me was I was like, well, I have to learn how to be the best caregiver on the planet. By the way, that didn't happen. But learning something new, despite the great resources that Family Caregivers of BC meant, it had to be maybe something for me. So I signed up for Duolingo for anybody who knows the app to practice like 10 minutes of learning a different language every day. And I'm also not very good at that, but but it's something just for me. Spiritual dimension of well-being, so looking at meditation, prayer, faith-based activities. Maybe you have some seed phrases, some mantras that you use, or practicing awe, right? All these things don't have to happen in big, big ways, right? So one of the things about gratitude too, or practicing awe, is I will, when I wake up in the morning, I will often name five things I'm grateful for, or five things that bring me awe in the greater world. And I will confess, and don't you dare tell anybody this, but sometimes if I feel like I'm in a hurry, I just name the five names of my pets and go from there. So again, it's not about judgment, it's about being creative and taking the time for yourself and doing what works for you. So that's what we're going to talk about next. What are you going to do to take action, right? So it really truly is, I can't emphasize this enough, vital for you to be able to identify and advocate for your own needs, like they matter, and how to take action when it feels impossibly tough. So the needs of the care recipient are often great and usually uppermost importance in the minds of people on the care team, such as doctors, nurses, even the caregiver themselves, right? But what about the caregiver's needs, right? When's the last time someone asked you what you needed, right? Since so much caregiving requires our own needs being placed on the back burner, I want you to take the time, even just right now in this webinar, to identify and advocate for your own needs, right? Caregiving inevitably involves like effort, self-sacrifice, but if we are constantly neglecting our own needs, we risk exasperating our own health issues, right? And we risk sacrificing our emotional and mental well-being, right? So, according to self-management research, key to a successful goal-setting action plan is taking one step at a time with a small action you can finish within a week. So example, I love gardening, but it would not be realistic for me to say, and I'm going to completely landscape the I'm going to re-landscape the front lawn this week, right? So it might be pared down more to like I'm going to plant all the tomatoes. If it gets any warmer in Victoria, for anyone who's been here, we had quite a chilly weekend. So taking one step at a time, starting with easy wins to build confidence and momentum for bigger goals. Um, Breaking larger goals into smaller, more manageable steps. Again, this is about like mitigating the overwhelm that we sometimes feel, right? And creating a plan that helps you maintain or improve your well-being. So, and if this proves daunting, by the way, which it might, connecting with family caregivers of BC is a way to kind of figure these things out. But we're going to get you started right now. So buckle up. Okay. So let's think about right now. What stressor would you like to reduce? Okay. What is the stressor that you would like to reduce? And what's a source of energy that you would like more of? Okay. So just think about that for a moment. And if you find yourself thinking many things, that's okay too. Because really we're just gonna then think about those and say, then what's one small action you can do this week? So write down like one self-care focus, like, and be specific. So instead of saying, well, um, I'm gonna be happier. Well, that's, I wouldn't dispute that as a goal, but you want to make it sort of more like concrete and actionable. So maybe it's, I'm gonna listen to some comedy, right? Or I'm gonna laugh, or what have you. But be specific. Like, what's one self-care focus you can do? And then what's a small action you can take to do that this week? So if I'm like, I need to bring more joy into my life and laughter brings me joy, then I'm going to watch this funny show or listen to this funny podcast. And ask yourself, what will you do? How much will you do? When will you do it? And by the way, it's okay to put that on your to-do list as like something that actually is necessary. Because remember, we talked about self-care as being necessary for people who caregive. And then also, kind of commit to how often will you do it, right? It doesn't have to be perfect. You don't have to, decide that you're going to start meditating and become a Zen master by, the following week. It's more around what can you introduce, being specific about how you're going to do it, where you're going to do it, when you're going to do it, and then commit to it because you deserve it. So I really hope that this has allowed folks some time to reflect on what they can do for their own self-care, no matter how small. I hope it's also given you an opportunity to learn about some of the resources that are available through Family Caregivers of BC to support you. I know for myself as a caregiver, I can honestly say I don't feel I could do this journey without these folks, and would really encourage you to connect with this very, very friendly community. So now we have some time for questions and answers.
Wonderful. Thank you, Cole, for sharing your experience and your reflection and your very thoughtful insights with us today. I've been answering some questions in the Q&A as we moved along, but we have about 18 minutes here. So if you do have any further questions, you can pop them in the Q&A or you can pop them in the chat. But before we do that, I guess my question to you, Cole, is if you have one takeaway for everyone here today, what would that be? Or one small action?
One small action.
Hmm.
Um, One small action. Oh gosh.
I know, tough to narrow it down, hey?
Well, it is because when you said to me, what's one takeaway? The first thing that popped into my mind was you can't do this alone. And please, people learn from my mistakes, like in terms of, leaning towards being a perfectionist. So that's sort of the first thing that popped into my head. But I think the takeaway is that, like, even thinking about today, like, is this webinar the thing that you did to recharge your battery today? Or if you can reflect on something, is there something more that you would like to do today that's going to recharge your battery, right? Or allow you to sort of roll with the waves of caregiving. And when we think about, the idea of, you said one thing and then I can't stop talking, right? But when we think about, like, I really want to emphasize too that, like, when we think about like mindful practice, it really is just, I just want to encourage people to just zone into the moment. And so sometimes that might mean, like, I know for myself, like, I felt like a level of irritation that my mom-in-law was always watching TV. And then when I said, actually, we could watch a show together, I was like, oh, that changes things. It's like I'm just zoning in for the moment. Same thing with, like, instead of thinking about what I have to do next, which is like I have a to-do list that's long. it's being in the moment and saying, okay, this is what I'm doing now, right?
Mm. So
Yeah.
really practicing that mindfulness.
Yeah, yeah. And and if people don't like that language, then it's also like you can just say like, what am I doing in this moment? Like, and how do I be fully present with what I'm doing as a way
Mm.
to sustain my pace as a caregiver so I don't burn out.
We
Yeah.
just had a question come in the
Sure.
chat. Isolation is real and need for community is as well. But for folks who've been feeling isolated for a long time, how do you find people who fill your cup, especially when you live alone, don't have a partner, etc.?
Yeah. Oh my gosh. And I kind of feel like you know, I think a lot of us had a taste of this during COVID.
Mhm.
But depending on kind of where your circumstances are, yeah, isolation is real and social connection is a real need. So I would just encourage, if the first door you open is through Family Caregivers of BC to attend a virtual support group, then come on board because you'll feel less alone almost immediately. I don't really always talk in declarative language like that, but when I first met up with other people, I instantly was like, oh my gosh, I'm not alone. And it was such a relief. I could feel my nervous system completely settling. I know for myself too, there's a community of activists that who I joined virtually. They're in Toronto, and so we have our meetings on a Sunday, and I'm able to really connect with them even though I can't see them in person. So really thinking about what is it that would fill you up. And I have good news. The research says you only need one person to improve your psychological well-being. So I hope you find your person.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? We have about 14 minutes. So maybe if there are no other questions or comments, we can use the next 13 minutes, 10 minutes to practice some of this incredible um, reflections that Cole has provided to us. Maybe that might be stepping out on the front step and just taking some deep breaths. Maybe it's becoming that bathroom master, meditation master that you mentioned. We're getting some comments. Thank you for this. Yes, we will be sharing the recorded webinar. It was recorded, so we will be posting that as well as sharing it with all of those that were registered.
And I'm wondering too, as people are kind of signing out and saying goodbye, like if they could pop into the chat, like what is one thing that they're going to do today? As they leave. That might be helpful because we learn best. We're better together. We learn from one another, and what people provide is also what then we can share with other caregivers.
Mm, great idea. So I want to thank you all for showing up here today. As Cole mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, it's very difficult for us to carve out time for ourselves. And showing up today is the act of self-care and showing ourselves that self-compassion. So just thank you all for being here with us during May Caregiver Awareness Month. We welcome you to connect with us, whether it's through our caregiver support line, which is Monday through Friday, through some of the links that I provided in the chat there. They're all related to the content in the webinar. Education, support groups. We just truly hope that you continue to use us as a resource and that coming out of this webinar you feel less alone and that there is a community here to support you.
Mhm.
Some really great comments in there. Thanks, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you, Cole.
Oh, my pleasure, my
Yeah,
privilege.
appreciate it. Bye, everyone.